What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. Tonight, I want to look at it from another lens. I want to look at the therapeutic effect of the steps as helping us achieve self-esteem. Now, the person that I really rely on heavily to understand and to study self-esteem is the work of Dr. Nathaniel Branden. Dr. Branden, I think, has written more about self-esteem than anyone else, any other psychologist that I've found. There have been others that have addressed this issue, but none as thoroughly and prolifically as he has. And I got to attend a conference that he spoke at. It was in Dallas, Texas, and it was the second international men's meeting. And men were coming together to explore what it means to be men, what it means to live with the man rule, so to speak, and how we can transcend some of these ideas we have about who we're supposed to be and stuff. And he got up in that conference, and it was his first delivery of a presentation that he called the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, which eventually became one of his final books. And it's an outstanding book. If you want to read one of his books on self-esteem, I would recommend the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. And I want to talk about those 6 pillars because I want to talk about how the steps help us achieve each of those pillars of self-esteem that Dr. Branden talked about. So the first pillar of self-esteem is living life consciously. Now, we've talked about all along how if you look at the steps, beginning with step 1, every step is increasing our self-awareness. Later on, the steps also increase our awareness of others. But in the beginning, we're increasing our self-awareness. Our awareness is something that grows and is built upon with each and every step as we go through and work the steps in our lives. So by time we get to step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we have so much more awareness of ourselves, of life, of what's important, of who we are, who we're not, so to speak, than we've ever had at any other point in our life because of all the work we've done. The steps are helping us live a conscious life. It's very easy for us to look back and see how unconscious we were, or as Gurdjieff calls it, that we were asleep, dreaming we were awake. But we were just automatons. We were just doing what we should do without much thought about it, without challenging anything. We were just going through our lives, asleep. The first step wakes us up. And we continue that awakening through all of the steps. So you can see how the work we're doing, the inventories, the owning our powerlessness, the seeing our unmanageability, developing hope, making a commitment to this life, doing an inventory, a personal inventory, now sharing it with someone else, looking at what we've called our character defaults, not our character defects, but our character faults and how these things have manifested in our lives, especially our emotional dependence, and really understanding that. And then in step 7, aiming to develop the best possible attitude. This is all about increasing our awareness, making a list of people we've harmed, going out and making amends to those folks. And then in step 10, continue to take a personal inventory. It means live life consciously on a daily basis. Pay attention to what you're doing and the impact you're having on yourself and others. Step 11 is increase and expand that consciousness, your understanding of yourself, of reality, of these new forces these life forces that we're getting in touch with in our life and our ability to cope. So we are living consciously. Dr. Branden calls living consciously is living responsibly towards reality. That's how he describes it. Living responsibly towards reality. It's being aligned with reality and learning to cope with life as it is. Not the way we think it's supposed to be. Not the way we demand it to be so that we're okay. We don't make it all about us anymore. So that's the first pillar of self-esteem, living consciously. The second pillar of self-esteem is self-acceptance. As we've worked these steps, we've now developed a much more compassionate interest in ourselves than we've ever had. We let go of this perfection, as I was just talking about it in a study group, about who we think we're supposed to be okay. And we start to move towards accepting ourselves as we are. I call it the Popeye result. I am what I am. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. And we accept ourselves as we are. It doesn't mean we give up on striving to grow ourselves and to continue to address things that are problematic in our life. But this is the way that Dr. Branden said it. He says, accepting ourselves with a compassionate interest in ourselves does not encourage undesired behavior, but really reduces the likelihood of that behavior recurring. We refused to be in an adversarial relationship with ourselves. We now start to struggle with all of these conflicts we had. In fact, I suggested to Tom the other day, is the workshop he and I are going to do in July at the Harmony Hollow Farm is going to be on, achieving harmony in our lives and learning how to address these conflicting parts of ourselves. We're going to spend a whole day on talking about that and trying to find this peace within ourselves, which then will translate into in peace with others. So self-acceptance becomes another result of what we're doing. We are looking at all of us and realizing that we are much more than just our alcoholism. We are much more than our mistakes. In fact, when we really take a compassionate interest in ourselves, we see that everything we've been doing really had a positive intention to it. It may have been misinformed, but it was an intention to try to find a way through whatever difficulty we were challenging or we were being challenged with in our lives. The third pillar is self-responsibility. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I live in two worlds. I live in the world of the mental health profession, and I live in the world of the recovery community. And it's amazing to me the misunderstanding that the mental health professionals have had of the recovery community. The first criticism, and I've heard it so many times, is AA is a cop-out. You guys say that you have a disease and you're not responsible for yourself. And if you're going to get well, you have to be responsible for yourself. Well, I don't know what they're talking about. Because as I've worked the 12 steps in my life, I have never been so darn responsible for myself in my whole life. The whole program is about accountability. We're not copying out in any way. I take responsibility for everything that's happened, just the way that Dr. Branden talks about it, is when we take responsibility, we don't hold anyone else responsible for our lives. I create my existence. No one else does that. And no one is here on earth to serve me, to meet my needs. It's my job, not anybody else's. If I turn to you and you can help me out, great. If not, it just can't be helped. But it's not a demand. We let go of all of that. We unhook other people and we put ourselves on the hook. And not in a harsh way. We put ourselves on the hook because it's empowering to do that instead of blaming. When I take responsibility, I am empowered. I am no longer a victim of my circumstances, of things that have happened to me, even though I may have been victimized. I'm not saying there's no such thing as victims. There are. But as we know today, there's what we call post-traumatic growth, not post-traumatic trauma anymore. We're focusing on the growth aspect of it. The fourth pillar is appropriate self-assertiveness. You heard me define differentiation as acting for yourself without being selfish and acting for others without being selfless. That is what appropriate self-assertiveness looks like. I stand for myself, but I don't do it without having an awareness of you and what's important to you. I can ask you for what I want, but I don't demand it. It's a request, not a demand. So if I say, Kathy, I'd really like this from you, and you turn to me and say, I can't give it to you, I just say, God, it's disappointing to me. But I don't make you wrong because you don't live up to my expectations. That's intimate terrorism. That's not emotional sobriety. Number 5 is living life with a purpose, living life purposefully, is getting up every day with having a purpose in your life. And I think one of the things we find here is that we are serving a purpose that's much greater than ourselves, even though it's for ourselves. That's the purpose that we find. That now we want to be a part of raising this consciousness, helping each other grow along these spiritual lines that we've discovered, grow along the lines of emotional sobriety, see what we can do to make a contribution to our wholeness, to our community. That's one of the great things about what's happening here on Thursday nights. You know, we're all sharing this together, and you guys are taking it and carrying it out, and it's, it's radiating out from this Thursday night into the world, which is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. People are getting this message of emotional sobriety now more than they ever have at any other point in the time of history of recovery. And that's because of what each and one of you are doing when you're attending this meeting and going out and talking about it and sharing this message, just like what happened when the program started. It's an exciting thing. And the final pillar he has, pillar number 6, is living life with personal integrity. Every one of those steps are leading us towards integrity. Every one of the 12 steps are helping us achieve personal integrity. And as we've talked about, it's no longer an option. It's a requirement that when I compromise my integrity, my soul gets sick. And it's my reaction to that. It's not something that I can now, it's ignore and not honor and pay attention to. So it's a remarkable thing what's happening with these 12 steps. The methodology, the technology, the process that's involved, the unfolding is helping us really connect with ourselves in a very different way. We are differentiating ourselves. We are coming to know ourselves in ways that we've never known ourselves before. And it's an incredible gift that we're all given to have a chance at this new way of life. As Bill says, that can and does work under any conditions whatsoever. We go from an I'm okay if mentality to an I'm okay even if. So it's unconditional. We have an unconditional recovery. It is not dependent on anything other than how we show up and the attitudes we bring to it. And those are the things that we've been learning as we work the 12 steps. So now let me invite Tom in to be a discussant tonight. Tom, come and join me. And Tom Potash, I'd like to invite you to join me tonight in this group. And also Brian, because I sensed how disappointed you were last time that you didn't get to join us. So welcome.
I emotionally regulated.
Well, that's okay. But I also wanted to honor your enthusiasm and your interest in being a part of it. So, gentlemen, take a couple minutes and take whatever this got you thinking about. Why don't you share it with the group, and then we'll open it up for a discussion.
Well, I'll just pick it up because I want to talk about Nathaniel Branden for a minute, because where you started, it's first of all, I thought, and I don't know if he uses the term, but just as you were wrapping that up, Alan, I realized I think of what Nathaniel Branden has to teach, and I really connect that to you to an extent, but especially to Roger, because he speaks so much about Nathaniel. I know he had a relationship with him, but the term unconditional responsibility, you were talking about unconditional, it's like that we do. And that's what I got from the six. I love the 6 pillars, and I really encourage everybody here. In this case, what I suggest to people is I'll even be kind of pushy about this one because I really believe in this. It's like I have a physical copy of that book because I have to write in it and I have notes all over it. But I also encourage people to get the Audible version of the book because Nathaniel Branden reads it, and his reading of it is just amazing. He is so straight ahead and factual, and it's like there's nothing snazzy about his presentation, but it's just the idea that these are words that are coming out of his mouth. I just absolutely loved it, and I'm not sure, but it seems like the Audible version is somewhat abbreviated from the book, but I listened to it again, and I have listened to it probably 3 or 4 different times, but it's all about that unconditional responsibility. And so I want to just emphasize that. And I also want to just comment on something you said. It's I've heard that through the years too, because I was coming up in this business when there was the big battle between mental health professionals and AA. It's like anybody, and it still surprises me today that you'll still will hear somebody say, AA is a way of avoiding responsibility, a cop out. And the thing I say with pretty close to certainty is anybody who has that criticism, we know one thing about them is they've never been to an AA meeting. That's right. It's like I mean, the worst damn AA meeting I've ever been to, you couldn't get that impression. It's like you might get the impression that we never let anybody off any hook, and that we just beat them down until they take responsibility for themselves, and we blame them for shit that has nothing to do with them. You might get that impression, but you're not going to get the impression we're letting somebody off the hook. I'd love to see that meeting sometime. So I think that's because I quote my first sponsor all the time. AA has 12 steps. One of them mentions alcohol. It says that the rest of them are about how to be a better person. It's a program of being a better person. And then the last thing I just want to just tag on with what you were saying about because you've mentioned it the last few times, the victim thing. I think it's really important in language in terms to get this idea when we say we're not victims. It's like the word victim has a lot of connotations that has contaminated it in our language. It's like a lot of times when we say victim, we hear like, oh, you're a martyr or something like that. It's like, let's think about it in this way. A victim, like what you're saying, when there are victims, it's like that's just a factual term in terms of just the English language. If you punch me, I am the victim of your punch. I am the recipient of your punch. It's okay. That's just the truth. What we're talking about when we get into the therapy of this stuff and the personal growth stuff is people who are in victim mentality, or people who in my life, it's one of the things I'm recovering from. I come from a long line of people living in victim mentality as their default setting, which is to automatically assume how I'm doing is determined by what happens to me and what other people do, instead of how I respond to this. And that's a big part of what we're changing, whether we're working with the 12 steps or using the 6 pillars of self-esteem, is we're changing from victim mentality to that assertive, proactive, short version of the Serenity Prayer. There's only one thing I can change, and that's me. So that's what I got.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. When I look at these pillars, we could spend a whole night on each of these. They're just so powerful in terms of their importance in emotional sobriety. Mm-hmm. And the one thing which I looked at, when I looked at these and I heard you talk about it, was humility. Like we talked about humility a lot in the earlier sessions as we walked through the steps. It's being honest with who I am and where I'm at, and knowing where the growth needs to come from and where the praise needs to be accepted. And if I have humility and have that honest view and understanding of myself, then I can live those other pillars and kind of adjust where I need the most help. But for myself, the biggest struggle for a long time was that place of trying to find the balance between assertive and aggressive, right? How do I not be a doormat? How do I not be an asshole, right? And that takes, for me, it took a lot of practice because of my codependency, and that recovery process has got me to a place where I can be okay with who I am and ask for what I need without overstepping and being too aggressive. And when I do, catch it because I'm aware and have some humility to know, hey, I just messed up, and practice the events process behind it. And the other piece, which I'll just throw out there, is my mindfulness practice really helped as well, because if I am present, I'm not fumbling through life as much, and I see where I can apply the pillars in the moment, or notice when I don't and I need to make some adjustment. It's that first one, living consciously, that my mindfulness training really applies.
Thank you. Mr. Lutz.
I'm going to change my name to Potash then.
Mr. It's really interesting. I have that book, the 6 Pillars. I bought it because I buy a lot of books and then I never read them. But that's one of the books that I've collected and haven't read. And it was cool to see you break it down that way. And what stood out so much just from like a macro perspective is how similar this is to basic ideas of emotional sobriety, and how basic it is, or similar it is to, the 12 steps. And it kind of seems like the more I learn about almost everyone's talking about the same thing, just with different emphases and different words. And it's just so interesting to see different variations of that play out. Alan, the quote you said about how self-acceptance lessens the incidence, the recurrence of, who was that?
That's Branden.
He said that. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I thought it might have been. That was such a cool one. It stood out so much to me, and it's like, it's the paradoxical.
What's the quotation?
Well, you want to read it, Alan, or say it? I'll just butcher it.
It was just that accepting, having this compassion and interest in ourselves does not encourage undesired behavior, but reduces the likelihood of it recurring.
Right. You got it. Thank you.
So it's the paradoxical theory of change, right? Which comes from Gestalt stuff. But I've been working with this young guy, and it's been so interesting. It's like the perfect example of this. through our work together, he's been developing awareness. And through his awareness, he's become aware of these sort of narcissistic traits that he has, the ways that he uses people to further himself, and the ways that he really isn't that interested in other people and really isn't interested in relationships with people beyond how they serve him. And as he's become more aware of these narcissistic traits that he has, he ends up imploding and collapsing because he starts shaming himself so much about it, and he has trouble looking at it. But what's so cool about the way that you lined it up is it's the opposite. It's empowering. I think you have to be able to tolerate it, though. Is the important thing, to be able to take a look at yourself and have the empathy, the compassion, the forgiveness, whatever it is.
Compassionate interest, right? That compassionate interest in ourselves is to put the perfectionist aside, who's going to beat us up because we're not what we should be.
Yeah. So you got to be able to see it, but then you got to be able to handle seeing it. And then if you can, then, it doesn't make it worse. It makes it better, because then you can actually do something about it. So I have really enjoyed working with this guy in dealing with his narcissistic traits, because he's been going through this process and sort of swimming through it. And it so accurately captures so many of these ideas. But really, I mean, that's what stood out to me the most tonight, is how powerful the ability to acknowledge all of the different parts of you, right? Or maybe the way Jung would put it would be the ego and the shadow, is the parts of us that we know of and we accept, as well as the parts of us that we maybe aren't so fond of or don't leave so much room for. So I think that's my contribution.
I just want to say real quick, I love that, Brian, is that the other thing I know about it's rare when you find somebody who has, just in my experience, rare that you find somebody who recognizes some of their own narcissism like that, and they basically, these are the people that we would say about them, well, they should feel ashamed. You should be ashamed, as opposed to those of us who feel shame constantly, who don't deserve it. It's like, so one of the things I've learned, I'm just saying this out loud, is not to rescue people from who've not felt shame, because I tend to rescue people too fast from shame because of my experience with it. It's like is we're going to balance it out later, but somebody who's never really recognized their impact and stuff like that, so it's okay for them to swim through some of that shit. It's right. And it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to watch, and not to intervene right away. But it's part of a process, because you don't want it to be too easy.
Allen, you said it to me one time, is that I was talking to you about someone in my family who had become aware of how their actions had impacted someone, and I was talking about how bad they felt, and you said good. And I was like, what the hell? Exactly. That's kind of mean. And then you explained it further, and you said, she's becoming aware of how much of an impact she had on other people, and she's feeling the gravity of that. And that's a good thing. It's going to let her address this and see it and do something about it. And I was like, whoa. So anyways, I just wanted to riff off that, because it's such a cool idea.
No, I appreciate everything everybody shared. I also want to call everybody's attention, and Alan's been doing this for a couple of our meetings now. Alan T is posting in the chat segments of different pieces of the literature from Narcotics Anonymous. And there's a wonderful body of recovery literature in Narcotics Anonymous. And I think NA, more than any other recovery program right now, is really trying to keep current with this stuff and continuing to come out, like with Living Clean and other publications that are just so much capturing what's happening in our lives today. So pay attention in the chat to Alan T's post, please.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.